Hello friends. So today's video is going to be a recent wrap up, and some of them are fantasy, and then I branched out and read a couple of other genres recently. I'll start with a fantasy book though, and the first one would be Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Life Ship Traders series, and the Realm of the Elderlings, which is this world in which a lot of Robin Hobb's series take place in. This one chronologically is the second series. A lot of people wonder, do you have to read the Farseer trilogy before Life Ship Traders? Some little clues and hints here and there that tie them together, but you absolutely don't have to read Farseer first. However, if you then want to read past this series, you do want to read Farseer because you're going to be following characters from that series. Anyway, with this, I really loved Ship of Magic. If you don't know what it's about, we follow primarily the Vestrit family, which is made up of the matriarch Ronica Vestrit, her daughter Kefria, and Kefria's husband Kyle, and then you have Althea, and then there's some other family members as well that aren't quite as prominent, but one of the children, Wintro, is a fairly significant perspective, and then you get Malta, which would be Wintro's sister. So you have this family that has a life ship, which is this magical ship where the being that is carved onto the front, after 3 family members have died on the ship, that being comes to life. It's called being quickened. And then whenever you have a quickened life ship, the life ship is able to navigate the seas better. It's able to navigate the waters and tell if there's any kind of danger. For example, there's serpents in the waters, and so the life ships can kind of clue the crew in on these potential dangers. So they're very, very valuable, and there's a lot of drama surrounding this particular life ship, who's going to take over. Even though the first book moves kind of slow, I loved it. I loved every page. I loved all the little moments between characters, because sometimes the most significant parts of the book would come down to just a conversation, or it would come down to the way somebody spoke to someone. It was just all the little details, all the tension between the characters. It was done so well. And then I also really liked how the economy and the culture was tied to the characters. I thought the world building always kind of came back to them, which I'm a big fan of that delivery of world building details. Mad Ship, I liked the beginning of it. It's funny because you can see a lot of tabs at first and then not very many later. I was so invested at the beginning. We're returning to these characters. I was ready to be back in this world. And some really morally gray and villainous characters in the story that you love to hate. And I didn't love this one. I was surprised too, because so many of my friends here on BookTube have told me, oh, the second book's my favorite in the trilogy. It's the best one. And it felt like a middle book to me. I did a live show recently with Erin from Booked and Busy, and then Katie and Steph, and I'll have all their channels linked. And I said in that live show that I actually feel like there's a character that everybody hates that's not really as big of a deal in this book. And I said, I feel like this book was missing that character a little bit. And I know that seems controversial if you know who I'm talking about, because everybody hates them. So you'd think it would be great when they're gone. But I just feel like it was so long. There's so many times, because I don't mind a long book. I loved the first one. And like I said, not a lot happened. But there'd be times where we just got so much detail that I didn't necessarily think needed to be there. There was one part toward the end where a character is talking about how they need to train the crew to fight, to be prepared to fight. It goes on for pages where they're like, well, first we'll start them off on oars and we'll have them fight against each other. And it went on for so long, and I was like, this book is almost over. Why are we spending so much time talking about this when you can just say, we need to make sure the crew knows how to fight. And then in the narrative, you can say they discussed blah, 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 blah. You can just fill us in. And then when you get to the important parts of the conversation, anyway, that maybe is not that helpful to hear if you haven't read it and you don't really know. It's over 900 pages. I don't mind a long book. I love a long book when I'm enjoying the book. I just think there were so many characters we focused on that I didn't really care about. There were new plot lines and new perspectives added that I thought were going to be interesting, but it just felt like we jumped into the middle of plot lines rather than feeling like I was starting where I needed to start. It seemed like I was supposed to have gotten perspectives from some of the new characters in the book before, and then when we were introduced to them, or when we were getting their perspectives here, 'cause some of them we met before, when we were getting their perspectives here, it just seemed like I should have gotten something previously. I didn't hate it, but I think after loving the first one so much that I had really high hopes and expectations for this, and it did kind of drag a little bit for me. Still really enjoyed the character work. I still find the interactions between the characters to be really well done. There's 2 women in the family. Women, because one of them is a child who's like, I'm a woman. But there's these 2 characters that interact in this one that didn't really interact in the first one, and I really liked whenever they were put in the same room together because it was always amusing. So there were, of course, plus sides to this. I was just a little sad because I was expecting to love it even more than the first one, and I didn't even love it as much. But both Aaron and Katie have read the 3rd book in the series, and so they've definitely gotten me hyped to read the next one. So fingers crossed that it does just have a case of middle book syndrome for me, and then I'll really like the 3rd one. After that, we have Love on the Brain. This is a romance story. I buddy read this with my friends Sophia and Abby, and then hopefully our friend Joanna can also pick it up. So this is by the same author as The Love Hypothesis, which became very, very popular. That one is a fake dating college story. So you have a girl who is fake dating a professor that everybody hates and insists he's so mean. And in this story, you follow a character who is not necessarily continuing on with their academic studies. It's more of like the next step. And so they're really excited for this opportunity, but then it turns out that they're going to be paired up with kind of their enemy from college, this person that they swear absolutely hated them. They always gave them these really intense glares, and you can kind of tell as the reader, maybe those intense glares weren't necessarily glares, maybe it was more just stares, they're just looking at you because they like you. So it's somewhat forced proximity because they're forced to work together. It's somewhat enemies to lovers because the main character thinks that he hates her. And I actually liked this one more than The Love Hypothesis, purely because in the fake dating trope, the whole time there's the fact that the characters are always like, he doesn't actually like me, this is all pretend. And at some point I'm like, can you guys actually have a conversation with each other where you acknowledge your feelings, And in this one, we do get the characters actually communicating with each other, and you do see a progression of their relationship throughout the story. I do think both this and The Love Hypothesis really lean into their tropes. I think the writing can be very, very fun and very accessible, very readable, to put it in a very silly way, but it's definitely like just turning on a fun movie, right? A popcorn read, if you will. It's a fun, fluffy, happy, good time. And that's not to say that there aren't important things touched on. So this one, just like The Love Hypothesis, our main character is somebody who works in STEM, and there's a lot of focus on the ways in which STEM doesn't always represent the best candidates as a result of some bias that people have and things like that. So we touch on these things that are very relatable, especially, I'm sure, for a lot of people who are in STEM. And then on top of that, the author clearly has a lot of expertise when it comes to STEM. And so I actually think that might be some of my favorite aspects of the story, is just seeing somebody unashamedly write something that they're passionate about. And so it's really fun to see basically a science girl as our main character. So that was probably the highlight for me. It was a good time, just like the first one was really fun. It was a good time. There's a couple scenes. I mean, the main character is very quirky and like, oh my gosh, I'm just such a interesting gal. And then her assistant is basically April from Parks and Rec. So the characters have a lot of personality. And then there's the guy who's just, hunky man who's very serious. But then when you get to know him, he's actually really likable and nice and whatever. It was fun. I had a good time with it. I had fun buddy reading it. It was a nice break in between the fantasy. Very different from that, I have also started reading Vagabond. This is a fictional story that is about a real person in history, which would be Miyamoto Musashi. He was a legendary samurai, and this story, it's actually kind of based on a story written about Musashi, and so this is now a manga version that's kind of pulled from that. I did do a very in-depth non-spoiler and spoiler deep dive for the first arc, which would be the Takazo arc, and it was really moving. I already can see why so many people think this is one of the greatest mangas of all time. The artwork is stunning. There's so many panels where you just look at it and you're like, dang. And when I was getting ready to do my review, I wanted to make sure that I had some shots. And so I was flipping through and I'm like, oh, that's a good one. And I would take a picture and then I'd be like, oh, dang, this one's really good too. And I'd take a picture. And I have so many pictures of the artwork from this manga just on this phone that I film on because it's absolutely incredible. But the story already is quite good. I think the initial opening doesn't really give you the most insight. And I mean like the very beginning. It seems like, what are we doing here? And then as you get further in, you can see where there's going to be a lot of depth and there's going to be a lot of very emotionally taxing moments. And so I'm really liking it. There's a lot of themes of, I described it as internalizing people's perception of you, thinking that you are this thing that everyone tells you you are. And I think that's a really difficult theme to read about. And then on top of that, just finding inner peace and finding your purpose. It's a lot that could be very pretentious, but I don't think it's written and drawn in a pretentious way. I think it is very moving and very beautiful. And there's the occasional really funny part. I'm really liking it so far. Sticking with manga, I have also started my reread of Fullmetal Alchemist, and I am so happy to be back in this world. I love these characters. I love the story. I love the humor. It is about two brothers, Edward and Alphonse, who they lost parts of themselves when trying to bring their mother back from the dead. That failed miserably. And Edward lost an arm and a leg, and his brother lost an entire body, and Edward attached his brother's soul to a suit of armor. And now they are trying to find the Philosopher's Stone in hopes that that will restore their bodies. And this just has so many amazing moments. It is tragic, it is heartbreaking, it is heartwarming, it is silly, it's ridiculous. It's everything that you can want. It is so good. I've said so many times too, there's so many characters that you can't help but love. Similar to Vagabond, I recently did an in-depth non-spoiler portion of a review and then a very in-depth spoiler chat. I was planning on reading 6 of these Full Metal Edition volumes at a time before doing chats, and then I started reading it, and I was tabbing just so much that I'm like, I can't read 6, otherwise the video is going to be 2 hours long. So I just was covering the first 2 volumes, and I am doing a read-along for this over on my Patreon, so we'll have some reading sprints and then a live show with my friends Jess, Petrick, and Alex. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be back in this. If you watched a recent video of mine where I talk about books and stories that have a wide range of emotions that are touched on, I talked about this series for so long in that video that it was almost like a review in and of itself. But I hope that some of you pick up Full Metal if you've never read it before. I would love to chat with more people about it. Years ago, I made a video about why everybody should read Full Metal because it's so good, and there's a great anime. The anime Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood follows this manga directly and doesn't leave too much out. And in that, I always tell people the first episode's kind of like a pilot. So if you do want to check out that anime, just know the first episode is kind of strange, and then the second episode more so starts where this starts off. But it's fantastic. I also really like the art in this. Full Metal's basically perfect. There's a reason that it's in my top 5 completed fantasy series of all time, because it's amazing. I love it so much. After that, I read a mystery thriller called 56 Days, and I went on a road trip recently with my mom, and I brought a bunch of different books, and this is the one that she ended up picking. Setup for this story is that we follow these 2 individuals who are living in Ireland, and it starts right before COVID and before lockdown, and they meet each other and they hit it off and they start seeing each other and they really like each other, and then lockdown happens and they don't want to stop seeing each other, so they decide they're going to move in together. And then you also get present day, where a body has been found, and at first you don't know much about the body. You don't know, is it one of these 2 people that we met? Is it someone else? What's going on? And you wonder, did lockdown create the perfect opportunity for a murder? And you go back and forth between different points in time. It actually reminded me a lot of Vicious and Vengeful in that way, in that it's not just past present, it's actually a fractured timeline. And what I actually wasn't expecting to like so much, but I did, was that when we start with one character, you do go back and forth between present day with some other characters and then her. And you follow her for a certain amount of time. You're starting to go forward, and then you get to a certain point, and then you go back in time with the other character, and then it suddenly starts to make you see things differently. And I thought it was really interesting, but the thing that made me actually probably like this more than I would have is the fact that there were some really difficult moral questions that are presented in the story where I was like, man, this is rough. And I don't read a ton of thrillers and mystery stories, and I'm biased because I had fun buddy reading this with my mom. So I am not the best at being able to tell you, oh, here's this trope that was used, this is used all the time, or here's this thing that we're so tired of seeing. I can't really give that information because I'm not accustomed to reading this genre, but I did have a good time with this one. I was very curious. I wanted to turn the page, and I thought I had some predictions right when I started. I'm like, I think it's this. And then as I was reading, I was like, I think I'm getting closer. And then things flipped on their head, and I was like, oh, dang, never mind. This is not what I was expecting. So I ended up having a really good time with it. And then last for today would be The Alloy of Law, the first book in the Second Era Mistborn series. I am reading this alongside Angela. She's doing a read-along for this Second Era books, one per month, and we've had a discussion for this already. So if you're interested in watching that, I'll have it linked. But we're going to be reading one book per month leading up to The Lost Metal. I am like most people in that I do like Mistborn Era 1 more than Era 2. I like the characters more, but I do really enjoy this setting. It's sort of a turn of the century feel where we currently have almost the Wild West, but then you have the city, and the city is being built up more. And the nods to certain things from First Era I really like. If you're going to do a continuation, I like this style where I don't like when the door has closed on a series and then you open it again and then it feels like you change characters to fit this new idea you had, and I don't love that. But with this, it's like, oh, these are different characters, and it's interesting to see how they view the events from First Era. So I liked all that. It is a reread for me, so I enjoyed the fact that I got to see even more connections between Era 1 and Era 2. I actually like Wax. I know a lot of people don't like Wax because they feel like he's kind of dry for a main character. I like Wax. I don't love Wayne. I find Wayne kind of annoying. And I do like Steris, though, and Marcy, and basically all the other characters. I just don't love Wayne, but he's a pretty big part of this. So, you know, it is what it is. I like the expansion of the magic quite a bit. I like the sort of Sherlock Holmes buddy cop vibes that you get from Second Era. So in general, I enjoy it. It's just tough because I definitely like a lot of Sanderson's other works more. But it is fun, and it's nice to have an adult fantasy that isn't so epic or isn't so doom and gloom. It's nice to have one that's a fun, good old time. That wraps up this wrap-up of some books I've read recently. Let me know your thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned. Let me know what you've been reading lately. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.